All right. Good morning to everyone. Could I please have everyone's attention? Thank you very much to everyone for being a bit patient with us while we're just trying to get settled and get everything together. I'd like to take this moment just to extend greetings to everyone. I know we've got some participants on the virtual call, and here in Makanda, we've got some participants in person. Thank you for making time to join us today for the Cohesion Trust Civil Society Roundtable discussion. I know there's been quite a lot of excitement from the Cohesion Trust team and also from other organizations here in Makanda to form part of this conversation that's been building up since early 2021. So it's also with a sense of real joy and looking forward to a rigorous conversation that we open proceedings. My name is Usake Nhlabezo. I am the program manager of the Makanda Circle of Unity. We worked quite closely with Cohesion Trust in putting together today's proceedings, and I have the dual duty or position of facilitating the discussion, but also helping us run what I hope to be quite a healthy and vibrant program. There's not much in the way of proceedings today. Really what we want to use the space for, I think, is in the same principle as how civil society itself interacts. It's a reflection space, it's a discussion space. It is a space where we hope to get into some of the difficulties of organizing, but also start to identify some strategic approaches to building a resilient sector, a responsive sector, and a sector that's able to work quite closely with the communities that it's part and parcel of. So the nature of the program is that we'll have a bit of an overview from the head of civil society from Cohesion Trust, Comrade Boitoko Titlakale, and then we'll have a keynote presentation from the Chief Operations Officer, Uba Temba Mola. And then we have two sections that we've put aside just for some community-centered responses. We've got a participant from Makanda, Nosupiwe, who's going to share her reflection of having been resilient in the time. And then we've got a virtual presentation of some videos we'd want to show that were recorded last year by the Rhodes University Journalism and Media Studies and students who are studying television, where they did a profile of some of the community kitchens. As we all know, food security has been an issue in South Africa for some time, and the pandemic obviously exacerbated that further. So we want to use this space to share some of that work, but also to profile some of the people we might never get a chance to speak to directly who are doing work beyond what is possible to try and create space out of a prevalence of caring for community. After that, we'll then facilitate a broad plenary discussion in this hybrid format, and I want to be quite frank from the get-go. This is a bit of a new experience for me, but I hope that at the very least, my unwillingness to not give up so quickly will help us have a dynamic conversation. I encourage those that are on the webinar to please use the hand-raising function or the chat function to get some questions. We've got a team who will help facilitate that. But we'll also have a dynamic setup in the venue app where we'll get to hear some of the voices in the room. And after that, we'll start to close off proceedings. So I really want to thank you again for making time to join. I hope there's value in this conversation. I hope it's a conversation that prompts further thought and consideration. I hope it inspires you to do a bit more reading about the work that Cohesion Trust is doing. I know in Makanda there's a lot of value and joy that's been appreciated and received, and I hope as you hear about some of the strategies civil societies have taken, some of the work that activists and people on the ground have sort of taken to try and maintain the morale of the city and the location, it gives a sense of hope in these rather dire and trying times that there is still some sort of commitment that is alive, thriving, and breathing to continue building a society and a community of purpose, a community where we all work towards a collective goal. So without having delaying the program much further, I'd like to call up our first speaker, Uba Boitoko Titlakale from Cohesion Trust. He's the head of civil society, just to provide us a broader context and a more specific scene setting about what the nature of today's conversation is. Comrade Boitoko, please, over to you.
Dumelang. Re tsogile gantle. I believe that I'm a descendant of the Gqeberha. and that one of the most important thing is how do we communicate. Now I know if I were to speak Maitswana, we won't hear each other. But that which we do not hear, then we develop an appetite to understand beyond me being here. I want to thank you all, but also to welcome you. My responsibility is to just lay the foundation for the work that Cohesion Trust has done, which brought us here. Our purpose of being here today is to simply, because the majority, some of the work came from Makanda itself. And our responsibility today is to reflect on our lived experiences, and most significantly is together to say in the next 3 years to 5 years, for the sake of our children, our grandchildren, both born and yet to be born, can inherit a better Makanda than we have today. Not only better, but permanently different. That's why we are here today, and see if we can collectively recommit to undertake that journey, so that we are recreating that Makanda we would want for our generations to come. It is so important that we do that, because we all agree that we live in a very challenging times. Firstly, in South Africa, but the COVID even itself has created the many challenges that the world has never experienced, at least in our recent memory and our lived experience. What we are going to do here today is to assess how far we have understood what COVID has thrown to us. Some of them were not new. We already have those challenges, as we all know. But they were suddenly thrown into our faces, that we can clearly see what being hungry means. When you are locked in your house, you have lost your job, you have no money, you are uncertain where you will find something tomorrow with the hungry kids or children looking you in the face. But also how we as South Africans, as many other people did across the world, responded in the spirit of solidarity to make sure that we survive the COVID and the hard lockdown. That is why many of us are here today, because we were able to sustain ourselves through the support and solidarity of others. And there is no key example of how that unfolded than in Makanda itself. It is that spirit that we want to re-energize so that we don't lose it. It becomes a new part and parcel of our genetic makeup, so that if we can re-look at it, re-enhance it, we have the high possibility of recreating the Makanda that we want. That's one component. But we are acknowledging also, as you will see in the studies reports, that following Makanda, the hard COVID lockdown, and as we seem to be slowly overcoming COVID, our country has begun to experience deepening crisis, a deepening warring crisis. at Cohesion Trust, we were christened into the new year with the passing of the Archbishop that many of us cannot forget. But more worryingly, as citizens, we are beginning to be blessed and christened with the new fires which are creeping our republic. If we collectively take the responsibility, we should be able to own up, because some of these things, we know who's doing them. I mean, just last week, we just seen the town hall in Ngijima municipality been ravaged by fire to the ground. We must always be in a position to anticipate in order our infrastructure remains significant to our livelihoods and the future of our children. Unfortunately, the Eastern Cape and Makanda in particular have such a romantic and gigantic building and architecture. But if we destroy it today, we may not be in a position to reconstruct it to what it was and what it meant. Secondly, the community resilience study was a national survey project by Cohesion Trust, which was undertaken for two main reasons. One was, how do we as civil society understand and survive together with our communities during the COVID? What is it that we did so that we do not forget it? We should also be able to document it for the generations to come so that they know what the world went through. But what you did in your response when that calamity befell the world and ourselves. That was the first purpose. The second purpose was, how do we learn out of it to accelerate the change and transformation in our republic, in our province, in our communities? With these lessons, we believed we should be able to have a new agency to change things, because we have come to realize that the patience of our communities and our people and ourselves is waning down unless we do something dramatic, urgent, and very fast. And I'm sure we all agree that the study was well-timed and it has covered those key issues. And it is those lessons that we need to use as well of how do we rebuild our communities, our economy, and guarantee the livelihoods of ourselves and our communities going forward. In case, in 5 years' time, another pandemic arises, we should be able to draw from our experiences how we were able to manage, because this time around, we should be better prepared because we have a reservoir of experience that we will be drawing from to respond to the new challenges ahead. The survey was done in about 3 parts. We had 3 case studies. The first case study was from Makanda, which were generated by yourselves here in Makanda. The second case study was from Limpopo, from the district called Sikukuni. The third case study was done in Alexander Township in Gauteng. And these specific case studies were designed to make sure that we go down to the grassroots to appreciate how ordinary people were surviving. And then we did a national survey, which was to give us the overall picture and the state of civil society in the country and how civil society responded and what lessons are we going to draw moving forward. In overall, there were 9 reports that were produced by the study, and we will send the hard copies. But those who do not have electronic copies, we are in the position to share them electronically even today moving forward. But we also wanted to produce the hard copies so that you can be able to. They are very, very important resources that if you read themselves, as I do, I find it very hard how we survived the pandemic. If you go through them and you take the Makanda case study, some of the things were done by yourselves, but you may wonder, where did you get the strength to be able to do what you did? And it is that we need to revisit, because more often we forget some of this resourcefulness that resides within us. Now, these reports will be shared very soon. What we want to achieve in this workshop today are the following, not in a particular order, but they are premised on the deep necessity for us to take a step back, to reflect honestly in terms of how do we understand the impact and the damage done by COVID, to also reflect honestly what are the kind of challenges that they have been recurring in our communities, challenges of poverty, challenges of gender-based violence, a variety of other challenges. For civil society and NGOs, challenges of funding and resource mobilization. How did we survive? Because all of these things we had to interact with during the COVID. With speed, because we needed to respond fast and effectively. Now, what did we learn from those in order to inform ourselves going forward? That is a key issue. Secondly, we here in Makanda in particular, we did work together. How did we find the courage and the resourcefulness to mobilize ourselves to do what we did? What was the basis of our collaboration? Because I remember in some of the meetings that I was following, which were convened almost weekly, fundraising, manufacturing of sanitizers. It was so resourceful during that period. Let us not let that slip ourselves. Let us use those experiences, that working together, so that we are able to rebuild the Makanda we want. And finally, what we want to achieve today. Is it possible for us to emerge from this roundtable with 3-4 key areas that we all commit, that at the end of the year, at least we should have achieved one of them. At the end of the following year, we should have achieved 2 of them, and so on. And so that our working together becomes a weapon, a resource that informs us going forward, so that this becomes an era of us working in isolations, in silos from each other. Because the past 2 years have been of such a magnitude resource to us that we cannot afford or contemplate to forget that resource of us working together. Can we do that? And how best we can do that? Not only ourselves as civil society. Makanda is a historic town. It's a tourism attraction town. Makanda is largely an education economy. how collectively can we pull this together? How do we work with the municipality as our immediate local government to ensure that we service our communities? How can we together bridge the divide between Makanda East and Makanda West and create a community of harmony and a community of interest that has a common purpose to defeat hunger, poverty, and underdevelopment? I think we need around those key principles. Now, I want to quickly summarize the key outcomes from the studies collectively, both from the case studies and the national survey. Because it is so surprising that the kind of things that we were talking about that we say we did in Makanda are seamlessly the same as what happened in Alexander and what happened in Sekhukhune district in Limpopo. The only difference that I must say at this point in time is a stark difference between Alexander, Sekhukhune, and Makanda, is that in Makanda, there was a systematic coming together of the community of Makanda. That didn't exist in many other parts of the case studies. But it happened in Makanda. The coming together, even during that time, we saw the formation of a Makanda Circle of Unity. To the extent that this experience needs to be wrapped in the totality of the Makanda community. And that's what made the difference. And some of the key priorities that emerged out of the report, and I will direct you to one of the reports called an issue paper, from COVID-19 relief to the reassertion of the transformation agenda. And I want to quickly go through them because we will discuss them at length, and I know Sake will flesh them when we come to his section. The very first issue which came as a priority issue that people have learned, all of the case studies, including national, the first issue on top was food security. I believe that we all experienced what hunger can do. Now, I was learning that in some parts of Zimbabwe and even Tanzania, sometimes when the family doesn't have anything to eat, our poverty has lent us to stretch the power of our imagination, of our thinking, of our hope that one day something will be fine. I used to observe sometimes when the grannies, and I've seen it in Tanzania, they will lit the fire, take a big pot, pour water, and when the kids are not around, they throw stones into the pot. It will boil and boil until the kids sleep. That is the danger and the damage of hunger, because they had nothing to give their children. But we responded. We called the solidarity of our business people, of our communities. That is why you could have seen the sharing of the food parcels in the magnitude that we have seen them. That so many people didn't have to cook stones. It may not have been enough, but it sustained them. But on the other side, the purpose of the cooking of the stones was to say, I have nothing, but strange enough, the kids would see that something will be served soon until they sleep. That's how food security has become the key issue. The second issue that came was the social security. You can see the social security is linked in many ways for the poor communities to put something on the table. And one of the big issues around social security was the basic income grant. That the studies believe that South Africa should seriously consider the rolling out of the basic income grant. I'm not going to go into detail because you'll get the reports and we know the current debate around the basic income grant. The third issue that came was addressing the gender-based violence that the report called in itself a pandemic. The reports that came from the communities during the pandemic was that gender-based violence became pandemic, in particular during the hard lockdown. It has always been with us, but it got exacerbated. It's one of the issues that the report says, as a nation, as civil society, we must find a way to address it. The other issue was the access to data and connectivity. Many of the civil society organizations I know, and especially the community-based organizations and the advice centers, during that period, they were totally locked out of the world because they didn't have the money to buy the data, or even more instances, say, the equipment like the cell phones, the modern cell phones, the laptops, to be able to be connected with the world broadly. We know of many instances that many people were locked. They couldn't talk to anybody except themselves and their immediate families. They couldn't fundraise, they couldn't mobilize resources, and therefore most of them were rendered dysfunctionally during that period. We haven't studied sufficiently to date how many of the community-based organizations actually disappeared with COVID, whether they were able to resurface after that and survive going forward. Data became a commodity during COVID. And many of the companies that control data tripled and multiplied their income, whereas the ordinary people of the world cannot access it even today. The other issue which was raised was the responsibility, the relationship between the state and the citizens. In our context, it would be the relationship between the municipality and the citizens or residents of Makanda. How do we make that relationship work for the people? How do we ensure that the local government responsibility responds to the needs of the citizens? But at the same time, what is our responsibility to make our municipality work for us? So one of those things that we need to seriously combat. Strange enough, the issue of corruption was really below, but I don't think they were based on the priority list, but I'm just following them as they came. Issue of corruption, but also one of the longer sections to say corruption has become an enemy of South Africans. How do we take responsibility to eliminate corruption from our government, even from ourselves within civil society? Because corruption is not only in government. It has become a societal scourge that we must eliminate. And I'm sure that we will all agree that we must urgently find a way of removing corruption from our system. And finally, and I don't think it was finally because it is not important, but it also has a longer section. It's a challenge of the youth. How do we respond to the critical challenge of facing the youth? Unemployed, because one would assume, as the report says, the current period should be designed for the flourishing of the youth, because the youth, they are integral part of what do you call it? What do you call it? You always talk about the fourth industrial revolution. I've always seen the kids, they can even type without watching the social media. They understand that, but they are the most deprived of the benefits of our modern technological era. High unemployment, school living without hope, and so on and so on. How do we address the issue and the challenge of the youth? It is not only unemployment, but it is how we prepare our youth to become active participants in our economy. That is the challenge, and I know some of us are doing that, but how do we collectively take responsibility in a collaborative manner to ensure that we prepare our future leaders today? I want to conclude, Chairperson, that these are the key issues, and I know Sake will refresh them when we get to, or some of them consolidated. In doing so and taking up the responsibility going forward, let us conclude by locating our responsibility as we are sitting here today, and those who are joining us online, that our singular focus and responsibility and where these challenges can be addressed, it is the local government, it is the municipality, it is the role of the citizens. Let us be profound about that responsibility and be very conscious how we are going to address that issue. And it is happening on the bedrock that we just had the local government elections. And we asked the question, how many people registered and voted in the recent local government elections? The majority of the people in South Africa didn't even bother to vote. To register, let alone voting, because many of them also who registered didn't vote. Therefore, we need to take responsibility to reconstruct an active citizenry that take high pride in our local governance. If we do what we want to do, and we are going to say we want to do, we will have a totally different picture next time around in terms of the next local government elections. In other words, one of the responsibility is taking back the active citizens to take pride as they did in 1994 long queues. The local government is our last defense and the first priority of our active ownership of our development priorities. Chairperson, those are the key issues that came out of the report, and I'm sure that in doing and following them up, in bringing back those who have given up in our system of governance, we begin today to bring them back, because there are so many people who sacrifice so much for us to be where we are today in a democratic South Africa. Let us reimagine the difference that we can make, the promises and hopes of 1994. We cannot give up today. It is in our hands. I thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Baba Koko, for that. We will obviously, in between speakers, repeatedly sanitize the areas. We are still in the midst of the pandemic. Just need to sort out pause that. Thank you very much. Like I said, this is a hybrid format we're all getting used to now, so I hope you'll allow us some space. But thank you again for just contextualizing that, both in the broader national context, but also the local, provincial context. Quite interestingly, while you were talking towards the end, there was a comment in the webinar when you were talking about the fourth industrial revolution and the need to digitize space as being a key development challenge. And there was a Mary Jean Thomas Johnson who flagged that 60% of South Africans could not access internet last year because of coverage and data costs. And there's a need to provide printed resources to provide necessary information, and in doing so empower the youth and unemployed. And I think that's a really lovely point of reflection. I'd encourage everyone who's in the room to continue taking notes. If you're in the webinar, please keep using the comment section. We will keep tabs on it. But we're going to move right on to our next speaker. I'd like to call up the Chief Operations Officer of Cohesion Trust, Uba Butemba Mola, to provide us a keynote address, and then after which we will then be able to jump into a bit more of a meaty back and forth around some of the issues identified. Uba Butemba?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Let me start by first acknowledging, looks like I've interrupted with...
Grainstown Feeding Association have dedicated themselves to feeding hungry residents of Makanda for over 20 years. They don't believe in turning anyone away.
Thank you. I was just about to say, let me start by acknowledging the Executive Mayor, Mayor Yandiswa Vara, the distinguished member of the Mayoral Committee. Some of these individuals, as I'm acknowledging them, they might not be present, but nevertheless, I think it's important that we acknowledge them. The Municipal Manager, Tate Mupomene, the VC, Professor Mabizela, the Chairperson of Makanda Cycle of Unity, Professor Owen SK, Program Manager of the Makanda Cycle of Unity, Sake Ntlabezo. I could have also extended, in fact, let me extend the same acknowledgement of the Chairperson of Cohesion Trust, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. This is indeed a pleasure to participate in the round table. I'm aware that there are also other audience who have joined us on the line. I'll just briefly talk about Cohesion Trust and make a few observations that I think the roundtable discussion can consider for us to consolidate a credible process. This roundtable happens when the community of Makanda, and in particular the council, is in mourning of the passing away of Mariana Mere. We were informed that she was a formidable, reliable a person within the council with the people that worked with her. But also the roundtable happens at a week after the State of the Nation address. We appreciated the engagements by the sitting. Yes, there was a little bit of political rhetoric, but also there were substantive issues that the House raised concerning the state of the nation. I just missed on the responses of the President. I think I'm looking forward to indulge in that regard. Also, the roundtable happens at a time just a few months after the local government elections. So in my view, it really happens at an opportune time that we can begin to say, what is it that we can do realistically? So Cohesion Trust is one of South Africa's leading development agency. We work with various stakeholders, most important with communities, to build an equitable and just society. We were established around the 80s at the height of apartheid repression. by leading icons in the struggle, the founding trustees like the late Dr. Bess Nodie, the late Archbishop Tutu, the late Dr. Max Coleman. Our main business at the time was providing support to development institutions and initiatives across a range of sectors. I was privileged to be part of the personnel in Cohesion Trust who traveled the length and breadth of the country, visiting communities and making sure that they access basic fundamental requirements they needed at the time. In the 1990s, in anticipation of a new role in the post-apartheid, through the foresight of the leadership of Cohesion Trust, Cohesion Trust Investments was established. Again, this was meant to broaden the vision and continue to work in uplifting communities through targeted development programs in various sectors. As an organization, we continue to evolve and sharpen our value proposition. We have recently completed the first 5-year, and we are on the second 5-year outlook in the design and replication of large-scale development models in education, in enterprise development, in institution capacity development, which has both legs of local government and civil society. The previous speaker, who is the head of civil society support program, is quite involved even in the amendment of the sector, social sector policy with the Department of Social Development. He's also quite immensely involved in seeking ways that we can begin to sustain the civil society participation and finding opportunities. So we are in this place, Makanda, because of the commitment driven by a collaborative effort that we think is relevant to all stakeholders in order that we can work together in striving to eradicate the sufferings of our people, which, as the previous speaker mentioned, which were exacerbated by the recent shutdown of the COVID-19. Working together towards a socio-economic growth of the municipality. However, we might not necessarily realize this, and it might become a pipe dream unless we expand the democratic participation, deepen accountability, by really bringing communities as partners into our efforts to change our circumstances. Cohesion Trust has been working in Makanda from 2019, specifically assisting the council with debt revenue management issues and building capacity and transferring skills. Through this roundtable, we want to reimagine our support to local government and really think of how we can expand our support where we can directly impact on the marginalized communities. Our work with local government was having some impact. I think we should concede to that. But whether that impact was filtering down to the greater community, we believe there's room for improvement. We believe we should think a little differently when supporting local government and work in co-creating solutions and place a less emphasis on issue-based support. We have included 3 elements beyond the revenue management support, which we extended to the municipality. First was the development of the indigent management framework, which was completed, and looking forward to see to what extent is it being utilized. Second, the development of a meaningful and commonly accepted LED strategy for Makanda that would promote sustainable local job creation. And we believe that the LED strategy should really reshape and modernize in terms of the solutions that are currently driving the economy. So it shouldn't just be an LED per se, but it must be an LED that can be easily and most importantly applied in the recent skills that drives the economy. Third, we have also supported the integrated stakeholder a community engagement support process. And it is this process that we are even facilitating today through the roundtable to use the lived experiences of our communities to inform a new value proposition on how we should best participate in rebuilding our communities. Building stakeholder cohesion is not a simple task. Active communication, communities and institutions with diverse views and perspectives must set aside their differences, agree to collaborate, and organize themselves for meaningful and constructive engagement. This also means getting the municipality ready to engage with communities. It's almost creating a new political culture. Makanda has a very active civil society who are passionately interested in the region's prosperity. Csos Trust recognizes that. And this positive energy, it is an essential ingredient for transformation and to remodel social cohesion for sustainable change, and thus instituted a discussion with stakeholders in this roundtable. We do celebrate, by the way, the achievement of the Makanda cycle of unity, the momentum that you have gained on how you started to organize yourself by creating various focus groups or clusters that would attract stakeholders with relevant interests and skills. Municipality department heads were represented in all the clusters, providing a first-hand opportunity for officials and civil society to share views and agree on key focus areas and initiatives. The new Makanda cycle of unity collaborative structure has started reaping the dividends. Relationships have started to mending, we believe. People are discussing issues and coming up with solutions, and thus the roundtable discussion today. Previously polarized groups have started collaborating, and we hope that this will even be cemented further. The cycle of unity has enabled a new food security cluster, that Wichoko spoke about that, to coordinate feeding schemes and enhance the regional response to food security during the COVID-19. This included collaboration with government agencies and municipality, making food parcels delivery possible while adhering to lockdown regulations. Members of the Makanda Cycle of Unity have also assisted in developing COVID-19 communication materials, manufacturing of face masks, providing sanitation liquid, and actively participate in the municipal joint operation committee meetings. Members of the Makanda Circle of Unity are therefore like-minded people interested in contributing towards fixing the city. Through the stakeholders now have a platform to engage constructively and positively to find meaningful solution. If all local stakeholders collaborate, community, government, and business act, then the local collective ownership of issues and intervention will improve the prospect of positive change. Integration and impactful programs that are co-created by local shareholders have a greater prospect of sustained impact to enable local communities to prosper, so poverty can be alleviated. Makanda leadership has demonstrated that transformation is possible when people set aside differences, embrace disruption, remain people-centric, and hold each other accountable. Therefore, as Csos Trust, we look forward to sharing our experience in Makanda and learning from you as we reflect on the journey we have had. We believe this is an opportunity, an opportune moment to deepen our support and facilitation of a people-centered development process in Makanda. We are not looking for silver bullets. We recognize that this process will take a little bit of effort and commitment from various stakeholders. As mentioned by the chairperson, today is supposed to be interactive, so we are really looking forward to the deliberations by the roundtable. Thank you very much.
right. Thank you very much to the COO for that presentation and also for sharing some thoughts from Csos Trust's executive side. And I think it would be remiss of me also not to flag that as you were talking about some of the advances made by the Circle of Unity, it's also very much a collective achievement and very much demonstrative of the organizations that form part of it. And I think it's important to name some of them without being disregarding to all of them. Organizations such as the Assumption Development Center, the Makanda Residents Association, the Rhodes University Community Engagement Office, Rhodes University itself, Csos Trust, Growcott's Mail, a variety of local kitchens, a variety of people in the city, academics and residents who have just taken off their time and contributed as best they can, the National Arts Festival. And I name them because at the heart of the Circle of Unity is this idea that the gains are made are collective gains. They don't belong to one banner, they belong to the masses. And I want that to be on the record as being sort of indicative of some of those who've come forward, who have bought onto the concept from the beginning, but have also really committed of their time and effort the same way with organizations like Makanda Municipality, who we're trying to build an active relationship with. And I think that's part of what you're highlighting is how Csos Trust focus has been intervening at the point of curating that sort of self-sustaining relationship. At this juncture, we're going to move on now to a bit more of an interactive session, but first off, we've got a presentation. You'll note that early in the agenda, I had flagged that we'd have a speech from a community member who unfortunately isn't able to join us today, but we hope that we can still carry the spirit of her reflection. Prior to that, we wanted to do a bit of an interactive session by playing some videos that were recorded by students of the Rhodes University Journalism and Media Studies unit last year. These students were done as community kitchen profiles of some of the community kitchens of Makanda. As we know, food security in our context, but also more broadly, is a real challenge, and food insecurity is heightening over the years. And we thought it quite important that as we have this discussion more broadly about community resilience, about being able to continue holding on and contributing out of the very goodness of our hearts to maintaining a sense of community, that we reflect some of these videos that are short profiles to give you a sense of what's happening into an issue that was highlighted by the COO, was highlighted by Comrade Boitoko as you were talking in their reflections. And prior to doing so, I'd like to extend obviously a sense of gratitude to the lecturers from the Rhodes University Journalism Department, in particular Rod Amna and Jane Vidge, who sort of facilitated this. The students who were involved took the time to go to these community kitchens, record these profiles. They were first played during Makanda Circle of Unity Food Dialogues held last year in collaboration with the Department of Social Development, and we'd like to obviously keep highlighting and profiling them. So I'm hoping that as I press a button, they start playing, but if I do look a bit confused, that's just because I'm trying to make sure they're playing. So with that in mind.
Without an ID, you cannot access housing, healthcare, education, the unemployment insurance fund, SASSA.
Food for Futures is an organization that provides more than just sustenance. It gives people their dignity.
I-item yona nginayazi yayilahleka yona yatshelwa yindlu phofu so bendizame manje njalo ngoba ndikhakade but awuzudibana nomama umeli fanele bele kanye ndizame imali engange-180 kugame sibe bekandenza ayithi kwa-Home Affairs so ngabe
Right? Grainstown Feeding Association have dedicated themselves to feeding hungry residents of Makanda for over 20 years. They don't believe in turning anyone away, even if it means putting themselves at risk. Gaza, a volunteer at Grainstown Feeding Association lost his life when he was stabbed by a man who wanted his plastic soup container. If I was there that Thursday, that would never have happened because we are always together. We are like a threaded needle. We were like twins. If one goes the one way, the other follows. In the soup kitchen, you can see Gaz's hand is missing because he used to clean outside and do all sorts of things. I used to cry here in the soup kitchen, telling myself that I'll get over it. It will pass. When I see that photo, memories from way back come to me. Look now, I don't have a friend. I'm alone ever since Gaza passed.
Struggling with water because I don't have a way to take at the church. As two ladies, elderly ladies, work diligent along me. I serve approximately 100, 150 to 200 people, and I serve it only on a Thursday. All I want is food donations. I don't want money, so that I can feed these people, these poor people.
In the Eastern Cape, more than half of the population live below the breadline. Food for Futures is an organization that supports over 50 local families with weekly food parcels.
When I first started working for Food for Futures in March this year, we were distributing 60 loaves of bread made into sandwiches, and we used to have sandwiches left over. We now are purchasing 80 loaves of bread, turning those into sandwiches, and we are run out by 11 o'clock.
Food for Futures has not received monetary support from the government, despite being a registered NPO. When COVID-19 struck, the food insecurity became severe and the numbers kept rising.
Food for Futures needs public help to keep us going, and the most important thing we need is money for food.
With your help, Mary Birds, the founder of Food for Futures, would like to restore the dignity and basic human rights of those who cannot afford to buy food as a result of unemployment and poverty.
COVID-19 has devastated local economies. Makanda's unemployment rate is known to be above 70%. That figure has increased over the pandemic, leaving thousands hungry.
My name is Deanne Oosthuizen. I'm a teacher in profession and I work at Ntaba Maria Primary School. I started the soup kitchen at the beginning of lockdown and I wouldn't have been where I am today. Sorry about that. I wouldn't have been where I am today if it wasn't for people that care. And I just feel in the position that I am today, that's just the least I can do. Is also to give back to the community. I would love any donations, as small as possible. If you bring us a few potatoes, it doesn't have to be pocket-wise. I mean, every little counts. I always say that I'm grateful for every little bit that comes in.
15 kids. And now I have, say, 50 or more kids, and the adults, when they come to, when it's together, then maybe I will dish up for 100 or more people at a time. Before I stayed here, I stayed in Vergenoeg at Sussie Hilda mentor. And then one day they came, 3 kids came, and they were hungry. And they knocked at my door, and I opened the door for them. And I dished up. It was on a Sunday afternoon. But the way they were eating, I can't tell you how it was. I could see they were hungry because they were actually struggling to put the food into their mouths, and they were shaking and stuff. And I saw them cried. I wish you can see it for yourself. People come and then they will ask me, I will dish up. Then when I'm finished, and you will see people sitting. Then the grandmothers or the elders, they will come and ask me, don't you have some rice for us? Don't you have some potatoes? Don't you have veg? That's why I'm telling you that I need donations more in the area of food. My heart goes out for the people, especially for the kids.
Haha! Oh, Super B, you don't have to be super to be a hero.
The strength of the Grainstown Feeding Association is that our mandate is very, very simple. There are people who are, for example, unemployed but do not qualify for an old age grant or a disability grant. These are the people that we serve.
Umna ndivolontiya ndivuka ngoyithanda into ndiya e-soup kitchen asuba ndiya ngenhliziyo eyophukileyo ndiya ngenhliziyo egcweleyo.
Coming to the soup kitchen on a daily basis, like Monday to Friday, makes me feel good. Because you see most of the people that's outside, they don't have roofs, they don't have meals. So if I don't come, what's going to happen? They're not going to have a meal to eat.
You don't need to be super to be a hero. You just need to help where you can, whether that's through financial means, clothes, food, or just showing up. That's what makes a hero.
Community. At this juncture, I'm going to now open up a bit of a plenary discussion, and the flow of it will be quite interesting. I really, really hope that I can make it as dynamic as possible. But ultimately, we're running a hybrid event, so we've got some people on the webinar participating, and we've got some participants in the room as well. What we're going to do is we've got a PowerPoint presentation we're going to run through everyone to sort of prompt a flow of discussion. Ultimately, the hope is that I won't be doing a bulk of the conversing, but it's going to be a conversation between participants, both those in the room and those in the webinar, to share their opinions and responses to some prompt questions. These are also informed by the 2 presentations we had from the head of civil society and the CEO of Cohesion Trust, but ultimately are really going to be driven and bouncing off the organic conversation that unfolds. So for those in the webinar, the camera will shift every now and then to person speaking. We've got microphones here. We will still adhere to COVID-19 regulations. And for those in the webinar, if you want to contribute to a question in the chat, please do add it under the Q&A or the chat itself. We will make the necessary provision to involve you in the conversation as best as we can. So, the first part of this all, just to highlight again, is that what really helped structure and give meaning and purpose to this convening is feedback from 3 surveys and documents that were produced by Cohesion Trust over the year of 2020, as Comrade Boitoko had been speaking. These were really covered in trying to diagnose and unpack what it was that was driving people to work together during the height of the pandemic at the start and onset, what it was that was informing their particular strategies, what the key challenges identified were, and what the various areas of collaboration, of success were, and in what opportunities could be identified from those moments. So it was trying to document in some other form or facet what was the experience like for community-based organizations and residents in particular context, with the area of Makanda being one of the examples of this. So there are 3 particular position papers that I know Kagiso Trust will circulate to everyone and make more publicly accessible. The first, obviously, is a discussion document that is pulled from the various surveys and assessments. The second is a survey that was run in the area of Makanda and getting insight from citizens in the area as to what it was driving them, as to their particular challenge points, any other broad reflections. And the third is just a summary of the findings. And all of these documents will sort of use and form part of this discussion we're about to have. But just to sort of give context and a face to what has been spoken around thus far. So, we're going to thematically structure the various discussion points, both for everyone in the call, but also for everyone in the room. The first is to try and talk around the issue of inclusive development. And this was a really core and central part of the surveys themselves, of the results that emerged. And one of the key strategic focuses that came out of those studies, but also I think for anyone working in civil society, is a twofold dynamic, one that's also very much tied to our context. The first is this issue of building capacity support for CSOs to function appropriately in the space that is civil society. And this support can extend and take form and shape in different iterations, always context dependent. But the second, and I think it's more particularly important for our current conversation today, is how do we find ways of ensuring equitable or balanced participation from all sides and aspects of Makana and Makanda. And for this, I think it's important to provide some sort of a context that's a bit more broad, and I really, again, hope I captured appropriately. But there's an undocumented understanding that the city of Makanda in particular, but in the area of Makanda, is almost a city, or a tale of 2 cities, so to speak. There's the section that's regarded as the west side of Makanda, and the section regarded as the east side of Makanda. And I think what that demonstrates is some of the remnants of the past, the difficult economic and social political times we find ourselves in, because it means that oftentimes conversations often either exclude one part or need to be explicitly rendered to be talking about the collective sides altogether in order to ensure that we're not talking about one pocket, but the entirety of the city of Makanda. And for those that are from Makanda or part of the call in the room, I think this term of Makanda East and Makanda West resonates quite strongly, because it's a language that's been used so much, and yet I think it's quite important to tackle a bit more directly head on. On a broader level, and I think both locally and nationally, there's been many reflections, discussions, and workshops where civil society organizations and members have reflected on the challenges of functioning, the challenges of getting adequate resources, the challenges of being able to pull out the necessary support both from the state and other entities to effectively execute the programs that they run. And these are very, very critical parts that inform some of the prickly points of functioning as civil society. So to kick off conversation, and this is very much Makanda context specific, but I invite anyone who is in and around the call, I'd like to get a sense from the room briefly. To what extent are we in Makanda sufficiently bringing on board organizations from the east, from the west, from all sides, to play a significant role in development projects? We've spoken today about some of the projects organizations are doing. We've spoken today about some of the entities that are involved in doing the work. Is it truly representative of the various sides? To what extent are we balancing out the participation of all these organizations? And secondly, very much tied to that, is there sort of a sense that civil society in Makanda is sufficiently equipped and supported to execute the programs that it wants to do? Does it have access to the resource support, the capacity support, the requisite expertise to do this work? in order for it to run its program. So I'd like to open it to the floor. I'd like to take a round of at least 2 or 3 questions. We've got 2 roaming microphones in the room that will be able to move around. And then obviously with everyone who sort of raises a hand and participates, please do introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and where you come from. We'll start with the room, obviously, and then we'll move to the Zoom call. I see there's 1 hand in the back over there. Is there a second hand? And there's a second hand there, and there's a third hand. There's 3 hands. So we'll start with the gentleman there with the red mask. I just want to check if the camera is able to focus in on him before he starts. Thank you. Your answer.
Okay, my name is Temingo Singeleza. I'm from Joza, which is Makanda East Side. I run a small business. In fact, I've got a little bit of understanding about Cohesion because it's been around during the difficult times. Makanda, Circle of Unity, I've been grappling with the Makanda Circle of Unity. Maybe if they can also introduce themselves, because the question you are asking is, if on the east side we don't know what Makanda Circle of Unity is, because it looks like if they are the ones who've been coordinating all this great work, it looks like there's a part of the community they are missing, because, but I'm talking for myself, maybe other guys who are from the east, maybe they know, but I must say, for me, I haven't been aware until now. It looks like they've done a great work, but I think if we are all included, it could be better. I mean, there are things we can discuss here, but I think it's better first to get an understanding of the people who are coordinating all this great work.
Thank you very much, sir. Can we just take the next question so they can also get a bigger room? I've absolutely noted your question. I think the next question is at the back.
Thank you very much. Monica Newton from the National Arts Festival and Grainstown Foundation. I think it is a really profound question, and I'm also fairly new, so I'm weighing in perhaps from the side of ignorance more than anything. But I think that one of the difficulties is that when you are looking for the participation of entrepreneurs and soup kitchen participants, these busy folks, their time is not paid for by anybody else. They are not sitting in an office with time and energy and the equipment to participate. And I think that is something that we need to acknowledge. And equally language barriers. Because for a lot of us, there are conversations that are happening, but they aren't necessarily accessible to a range of people. So I think that possibly we need to acknowledge that we haven't efficiently and sufficiently brought people on board. And that is one of the challenges that we have to deal with, is to say what is sufficient participation and how do we make sure that these are collective, recognizing that somebody like Themba Nkosi is taking time out of his business to spend time today, and that might not be something that everybody can do, either on the east or on the west. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica. I believe the third hand was over there in the middle. No, sir, it was right here in the middle, yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Engelbrecht. I'm from the Department of Social Development, Sarah Botman District Office, and I'm also a member of the Food Cluster. I think my friend has covered the issue of Makanda East, Makanda West with regard to understanding around Makanda Circle of Unity. But the question that I get mostly is that you focus on Makanda. What about the rest of Makana? What about Alisdale? What about Riebeek East? We have the same problems. We have civil society that are trying to do the same things, especially when you work with Women in Action in Alisdale, who is one of the community kitchens there, and they are crying to be incorporated into the food cluster, into the community kitchens network, so that they can also benefit, because they feel all the resources are shifted to one part of the community. Then I think also looking, I hear the cries about government is not supporting us, government is not helping us. But we need to understand, government's main responsibility is to provide an enabling environment for civil society to do what they do best. And there are limited resources. We cannot fund every community kitchen in every community. There is not enough money. And I think one of the things we tried 2 years ago with Ikala Trust and the Circle of Unity was to bring the community kitchens together and to look at the asset-based community-driven development approach, to say, let us look at what we have first. What can we do with what we have where we are to address what we want before we look for the outside? Because sometimes if just reorganize things a bit better, we can achieve more. And I think this is what the food cluster has shown during COVID. Like when we all came together, we pooled our resources, we make sure that everybody is assisted, that there's not one person going to 4 kitchens to get a food parcel, but they get it once. That there's a better scale of economy, and we could stretch the rand further to assist people, because SASA came in, social development came in, and we all coordinated. And Cohesion Trust had the list of who are the people who are benefiting at the different places. So I think that is the way to say, let's come together. So we were trying to have the different community kitchens to form a umbrella structure through which they can apply for funding to government. In the past 2 years, no application were received, because they couldn't come together as a group to work together just to access that funding. And also, community kitchens is not the way to resolve the hunger and the poverty in communities. We need to deal with the root causes. And one, because everybody's asking food, but where are our community gardens? Why aren't we using every space that is not being used in our community to start gardens for community members, for these kitchens, that they don't have to depend on people to provide it? Umtati training centers here, it's such a valuable asset. And from that we can do agro-processing. From that we can start selling, creating an organic market where we can sell. There's so much to be done, but we have to learn to work together and to look beyond our own self-interest, because I think everybody's very prepared to come together. So I think those are issues that we need to start looking at this session. When we go here, what alternative food system can we put in place in Makanda that all our residents, our citizens can benefit? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there's one more hand from the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson. I've got some of my colleagues here. Monica Newton. I think Mr. Sima Kushle, are you here? Sipo Albany and Dai Hornby. Okay, now we are a very new kid on the block, and we are calling ourselves MCCC, which stands for Makanda Civil Community Coalition. Okay? Hoping not to step, on the toes of existing organizations with similar endeavors, we are including recognizing the work that's being done by the, is it the Circle of Unity? Yeah, Makanda Circle of Unity. Our hope is to go Makanda-wide. So just to give you an idea, this is what we would like our board to look like very quickly. We are hoping that the board would have a director, deputy director, a marketing and communications officer, a legal officer, an admin officer, financial officer, and then we are looking to facilitate citizens' forums. And the forums that we've identified now are a Citizens Forum for Community Development, another one for Economic Development and Planning, another one for Social Development, another one for Human Development, another one for Health and Wellness, another one for Education, and we are hoping that the chairpersons of all those fora will become members of the board. Then we would also like a representative from Rhodes University. I'll explain that quickly just now. We would like to have a designated representative from Makanda municipality, and the chairperson of the Makanda Circle of Unity. We would also like to approach that organization so that they become part of that board. It is built on 3 pillars, really. The one would be local government, and we've already had a meeting with the Makanda local government, and they seem keen, but you know that there is a whole process that, you know, they have to go through before, you know, they could say yes, they would be part of it. Then Rhodes, we call a knowledge hub because of all, you know, the information that is vested in the organization. And then the MCCC will be representing the community at large through those fora that I have explained. So the idea is to send invitations to all, you know, the areas in the Makanda municipality, and these would include Makanda itself, Ellisdale, Riebeek East, Salem, Seven Fountains, Fort Brown, Sudbury, Manly Flats, and Carlisle Bridge. So whenever we have a forum, which we are hoping to happen once per term, invitations will be sent to everybody in the area, irrespective of, you know, their affiliation. And the business of these forums will be basically to provide a non-partisan platform for citizens of the Makanda municipality to deliberate on and make recommendations in respect of issues of common interest, to communicate then these resolutions and recommendations to the administrative office of the MCCC. So basically we are hoping to call meetings of relevant organizations, and then for them to deliberate, and then to, you know, draw up a list of priorities, and then communicate it to the MCCC, who would then, you know, try to find funding, you know, for them. Just in conclusion, I just need to mention that the MCC in no ways would like to, you know, step on toes. And in that regard, I'm just going to read from the proposed constitution. Okay, so the meeting shall be open to all interested groups or interest groups in Makanda municipality. Each of these groups shall operate autonomously and conduct their business as per their own mandates and constitutions. But we would like 2 strategic office bearers of all interest groups to be involved in the meetings of the MCCC.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just want to actually just sort of round up some of the inputs and questions. Thank you for the initial engagement. I think it's great that it's a mix of questions and inputs. it would also be great, I also don't want it to be a conversation with me, but with the room as a whole. But I think I want to start with the very first question you asked about Temingosi, and I think it also speaks to, in part, what Monica was saying and what Chris was talking about, and that the MCU as an entity itself is quite young and up and coming, but is built up of a composite of different organizations working together across these thematic areas that have been mentioned, food security, LED, education, etc., and that's part of how we've interfaced. But I think what you're touching on is the continual work that it must keep doing to spread the reach of what it's doing. Right now, it's not deepening as far as it could, and I think that's a point that has resonated with Kagiso Trust for separate reasons, which is part of why it becomes the first question we ask when we come to the space. As opposed to leaving it on the side, it's a matter of saying, actually, let's delve straight in. Are we touching in? And I think even if it's just you saying it might just be you, it's still an important sentiment to flag that, to put it in Xhosa, azifiki phakute ezitratweni, it does not reach us everyone on the ground. And as you talk about how you want to extend for the next 5 years, I know Kagiso Trust has spoken about how they want to continue their project. This becomes a critical part. And it's also highlighted by a comment that is in the chat that I believe was put up, my apologies, by Helen Holloman, who just pointed out that it seems like the basic question is, what must be done to cross the divide? How does the message of Kagiso's work go across the East? And I think that extends also as a question for the Circle of Unity. How do we extend it? And I think having these spaces like this becomes quite an important space to flag and reflect. Tied to this, I think I want to touch on what Monica from the NAF spoke about, which is having to acknowledge that a lot of this work that's done by CBOs, CSOs, by members of the community is not paid for, it's not equipped, it's not resourced, it's driven fundamentally by people creating time outside of even their own free time. The same way, Bab Temkosi, that you have come from running your own business, and I think anyone who's currently on the call has had to ship away space for this. It's about also creating space to acknowledge that hard work, and that's work that needs to be done, but it does make it quite difficult to sustain the energy all the time, and I think that's a very important and critical point. Chris spoke a bit about how one of the key focuses of the question must be asked is, why is it the focus is just in Makanda and not in Makanda more widely? Flagged a bit about the role of the government in not just supporting but providing an enabling environment, in particular for the success of projects and programs, and spend some time speaking quite heartily and heavily about the need to talk about communities of purpose around the issue of food insecurity and security. And I think just to touch on that question you were asking about why not Makanda as a whole, at least for the MCU, we're still building out a base here in Makanda, and there's potentially always space to explore later on as we grow, but there are organizations, and I think I want to be quite deliberate without excluding organizations, but be deliberate about those that I know to flag and mention them right now. So for example, there's organizations like the Grainstown Residents Association, who I believe last year reframed themselves as Makanda Residents Association, who are expanding beyond that. A large chunk of the work that I know Kagiso Trust is doing, while it's situated in Makanda as the head of the municipality, has impact and ramifications in the broader areas. But there's always absolutely space to consider how to build in impact into those various areas. And it's these conversations that help shape what that looks like. And the gentleman over there then came in at the end, I'm sorry sir, I didn't catch your name, to talk about one sort of idea and formation that's being formed, the MCCC, which is to build these forums. And I think if anything, what can emerge from this is networking and building connections. But really it's also a space to think about and highlight that there are different entities and persons trying to create as many possible pockets as possible for conversation to happen. What's consistent though is the need to center citizens' opinions and perspectives. We have two hands in the chat before I move to the next few questions. I'd like to just flag with the moderator if we can mention one. I think the name is Mr. Philip Mechanic. Will that be possible to give him a space to speak?
Moderators, unmute.
Hi there, Philip, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, so a few things on security. The first one is Community Kitchen developed some pretty skills at large now. And what I would appeal to everyone in a situation where they're catering functions, and I know what about the echo. Maybe I just turn the sound off on my side. Okay, I just turned off my own sound, so I hope the echo is better. So the community kitchens have developed great cooking skills and cooking at scale. So if you are catering an event where you could use those sort of skills, consider using them. And I think it's something you should be looking at more broadly, is to turn these things from charitable or aid to economic opportunity. And similarly with the idea of community gardening, to solve the hunger issue and potentially create income. The big difficulty I picked up talking to people who have attempted to do this is stray livestock. Any vegetables you plant that may take weeks or even months to become ready to harvest, a couple of donkeys and cows will make short work of those. So we need to start developing a more cooperative attitude towards the management of livestock in our communities. That, you know, some of these things have important cultural benefits, not just as economic resources, but we need to manage this in a way that we're all working together rather than some benefit and others lose. So those are just a couple of observations. The final one I want to raise is that there may be a bit of skepticism about new initiatives like MCCC because there have been so many of these things in the past. The answer to this is effectively delivering things that are used to people. So these food initiatives, I think, are great ways to start, but if we can leverage them to start developing economic opportunity, not just seeing them as aid, then I think that would be a great way of getting further progress on that. So I'll finish there.
All right, thank you very much for that, Philip. Really appreciate your sentiments. I know there's one other hand. I believe the hand is from a Boniswam Zimba. Oh, the hand is now down. Okay, thank you very much. So just to summarize what Philip was talking about there, which I think is quite important, is this idea that when it comes to community kitchens, they're critical skill sets. And I think what's quite lovely about that is, and he framed it really lovely, is this idea of shifting from charity to more direct impact-based work, is thinking about ways of working with the people in these spaces who run these kitchens and utilize them in different spaces, both as a way of generating funds, but also being more deliberate about how we engage and connect with them in the various spaces. And again, flagging on a question and a challenge that's been encountered in Makanda a lot is the matter of livestock. Anyone who's been in the city of Makanda in particular would have noticed at some point either having seen a cow take a stroll across the main street or a donkey, and that then also becomes an issue that cannot be dealt with competitively. I hope I'm not mischaracterizing what you're saying, Philip, but rather requires that cooperative approach to trying to navigate and respond to it and create other pockets in space. And for me, what I want to pull out there is this language of saying, let's actually just sit down and think creatively about how we can move around, both in terms of supporting people, but also generating and creating a support for the organizations doing this work more directly. So I want to move on from this. This is just the first of 4 different thematic areas. The next one that we're going to talk about, and again, thank you very much for that lively conversation. I can at least tell you I feel a bit better. One always worries when they come with questions that people won't engage, but I feel a bit more alive right now. The second one is on what we want to talk about as being a set of broad development challenges that have been identified, and this one is married quite largely to the difficulties of that were extrapolated from the surveys conducted by Csos Trust. In one of the reports that was pulled out, which is on the Community Resilience Survey findings, there are 5 key issues that were identified in surveying different persons and organizations in the community. And in no particular order, these issues that were identified were issues such as poverty or access to jobs, challenges with health and water, and I think that one's very much tied to the COVID-19 pandemic at the time, vulnerable groups, and that's a broad categorization, but really captures a group of people who are most in need of direct support from various institutions and structures, adaptability to the conditions of the pandemic, and the 5th one, which I think has come up already quite strongly as a conversation item, is that of food security. This is what the reports pulled out, and I think as empirical evidence or data, it becomes quite useful. But it's always important that as we have these conversations now, we take stock and we stop and ask ourselves, and that's the basis of the questions is, are these 5 that have been identified and pointed out yet, are they still relevant and resonant as key development challenges in the context of Makanda and Makanda? Are there any others to identify? And I think what's really critical to point out here is that this is not an exclusive list. We're talking in the context of civil society and being responsive to the challenges at hand in ways that civil society itself can play an active role. So are these relevant and resonant challenges in the context? I'm looking again at some of the municipal officials in the room. I'd love to hear some of their voices in this. And tied to that, and right again, we're throwing around ideas collectively as a room, what would a strategic approach or strategic approaches to responding to these challenges look like? Which sectors need to be included to support this? And I'm going to piggyback off what Philip said towards the end about thinking differently about ways of supporting community kitchens. Think about how we can bring them into catering services and utilizing the skills they've organically developed. How does this extend to the various other challenges that have been identified, both the ones on paper and any other ones that anyone on the floor and or the webinar would like to raise? So I'd like to open up for some questions, maybe 2 or 3. I'll start with the floor again. Any inputs or takers? Check again. About 10, because I see you. I'd like to see if there's at least one more. And I see you, sir. I'd like to see if there's another voice so that we're not having the same voices all the time. We'll start there for now. About 10, Ngosi, over to you, sir.
Chair, I mean, if I look at those things, those are South African problems. The 5, they are not just our problems. I think they are South African problems. And I saw the LED strategy, which was developed in collaboration with Cohesion, and then I saw the municipality. I think they put some sort of framework with targets, forums to discuss LED issues, and deadlines, and who's going to do it, who's going to be involved. Because if we start to get to those things, like as Chris was saying, if you look at food security, in the past we used to have integrated forums, like war rooms. In our ward, for instance, Ward 2, which is in Joza, Councillor Konga used to call everyone, because it was a model developed by the former Premier, Maswan. And you'll have people from social development. They will tell you what is it that they provide to the communities. And then we'll have agriculture. They talk about seeds for food gardens. They talk about chickens. They talk about chicken feeds. So I think most of the things here, I mean, if you highlight them, it's fair enough. But what type of forums do we need to address those things? Even the organization Chris was mentioning, that the people at Extension 7 who are assisting with gardens, Umtati, they were there. So you'll have a sustainable food security if each and every household has got a garden. And then municipality, for instance, they've got areas which are called common ages. Those common ages, some of them are not used, some of them are used. So people can even use them for their own farming to address the food security. The use of jobs and poverty, I think those are the things even the LED strategy can talk about. I mean, how do you support entrepreneurs? How do you enable the environment so that people can create their own jobs? Because it looks like now, if you look at the NDP 2030, most of the countries, I think South Africa is trying to emulate them. Small businesses are the ones which create jobs, because there's many people now who are unemployed. I think it's more than the government who should be involved. I think we should all be involved. So I'm trying to say all of those things, we can discuss them, and they are still relevant. They will remain relevant until I think we address the inequalities. And how do you address them? I think you need a stakeholder engagement, and in particular, government should work with the communities. Otherwise, we are the ones who know where it pinches. Thank you. I hope my broad, high-level input.
No, thank you very much, sir. There's another hand over there in the corner. While we move to that hand, are there any other hands from the room? I see a third hand over this side, but we'll start with there, and then we'll come this side.
Thank you, Chairperson. When I opened my kitchen door, it's a stable door, I could actually have a conversation with my neighbor, at a very low level. Meaning that we are so close, in terms of our plots, that there is hardly space, for gardens. Well, I've read about, new innovative ways of creating smaller gardens, but I think generally our local government should consider, cutting bigger plots for people in the townships, because really there's no space. Then I like the idea, in the absence then of those who don't have big plots, the commonage idea, where, in each of, these township areas, there could be gardens that will be looked after, cultivated crops and whatever, by that particular community, for that community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that input, sir. And then we'll see one more hand over this side. And then, there are two more hands from the floor. So we'll have, three more hands from the floor. All right, cool. We'll start this side, then we'll move back around.
Thank you. Good
Please
day.
introduce yourself, sir.
Good day to all of you. My name is Sipo Albani. I belong to the MCCC. I think let me just start by saying, I think what glue our discussion, together, is the departing, statement which was made by Cohesion, COO, where he said that, let us set our differences, aside. Let's try and begin to work together. Some of the suggestions which have been made here by a number of people are projects that are actually a work in progress, in different forms, whether in township or town and so on. But we need to set our differences together and start being responsible as community, of Makanda. So I'm saying the reason why I'm saying this, he has also mentioned that at least, the polarized groups, are starting to move forward together, and begin to see a reality of working together, that we can do more. So we can achieve this, let us start, going to our communities and see what is it that they are doing, what is it that we can put together and make it work. So it is workable. It's a workable solution. And I must actually say I appreciated this, the comment made by the lady there from Sarah Bartman, who was actually saying, what about the other areas? Those are areas at least are being catered for, but in a small, fraction, and the food, let me say at least, the food stamp, is not loud enough, because one is doing his own thing in his own little corner and so on. So let us try and integrate and all these actually processes. I know that the Department of Agriculture has started, some actually initiative of assisting these people at least regarding food gardening, regarding at least people, encouraging people at least to just do the gardens at their backyard and so on. But at least the voice is not loud enough. It's not loud enough, as Philip was saying there, because it takes time at least to reap the fruit that you have planted in the garden or even vegetables. But I would actually end it there, sir. So thank you.
There's a hand over there from Monica. There's two more hands from the floor, and then I know we've got some comments from the chat I'd also like to share.
Thank you very much. And it's perhaps just to say that, yes, I absolutely agree that the developmental challenges are relevant, but perhaps in terms of number 4 on the list, adaptability to the conditions of the pandemic, we should reframe it to say resilience or something, because the pandemic is not the last crisis that we will face. There will be drought, there will be fire, and the response that we've been able to gather together, which I think has been pointed out by the earlier speakers in the day, do speak to the fact that we need that social capital to enable us to essentially be resilient and adaptable to any crisis, whatever it may be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There's a hand over there, the 5th hand.
Thank you. I'm Pamela Zonda. I'm a station manager at Grainstown. One of the problems that keeps me awake when I think about the situation in Makanda, it was just mentioned just now by one of the speakers that in Makanda is the education economy. But the problem is we've got this high institution here, roads, TSG, and the other schools. But the people from Grainstown East, they are not as empowered as people from Grainstown West or people who are coming from all the other towns to come and get the education here in Grainstown. So I feel, there has to be some empowerment that roads does to the people who are living in the east of the town. Because if those communities are not empowered, whatever that is being done, it will just, it won't have any impact. Another thing that keeps me awake at night is the access of jobs to young people. As a person who's working at a radio station, there has been an influx of young people, young graduates who are not working, who are looking for jobs. So I think if, there was a question that you've asked, that is the civil society in Makanda sufficiently equipped, and strengthened and supported to execute its function. So as a radio station, if we can have a strong partnership, with Rhodes University, where when those young graduates, they finish at Rhodes University, and then they are able to work for the station, if it's fully equipped and supported, that is possible. So by the time they look for jobs somewhere else, they have enough, training and development. Because when they apply for jobs, they are told that they need, they have to have some experience, of which that they do not. So I feel there's a lot that we can do.
Okay. Thank you very much,
working
Pamela.
Together.
Thank you very much. There's a hand over there with the gentleman, and then we're going to move down. So Kalapa. Yes, the gentleman over there. Then we move back towards Mamtai, and we'll end off there for this round of questioning. Sir.
Molweni. I'm Kjetil Torp from AwareNet and the JOSA UTAB. I was just looking at you asking here if there are any other key development challenges to address in the context of Makanda and Makana. I feel we maybe could add spatial inequality. And when I say spatial inequality, I'm not talking about, we all know the enormous income differences between East and West, but that's really more like, that's a South African wide or maybe a global challenge that can only, or that can maybe only be done solved by some revolutionary solution. So I'm thinking more, when I say spatial inequality, I'm thinking more about like the fact that there is not really much of jobs in Makanda East. Most economic activity is happening in town, whether it's shops, whether it's government departments, etc., industries. So, yeah, is there a way that Cohesion Trust, other stakeholders, municipality can look at developing? More like have a strategy for decentralization of Makana as a whole. I mean, just like think of the actually just think of the kind of very inefficient way we are doing most workers having to pay 30 rand to go to town every day. It's, and back again. It's after the recent tax increase. So yeah, I'm just on a local level, decentralization, spreading job opportunities across town.
Thank you very much, Cheto. And then we'll take the last hand from Dai over there in the back.
And obviously that applies to Alisdale and Riebeek East even more so.
And the broader areas. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Boetie. I want to respond to Spam, one of the previous speakers, around the role Rhodes University can play. And just to say that I acknowledge that there's so much more than that we can do. And it's evolving and unfolding all the time, and I'm seeing opportunities just sitting here, as I'm sure you all are. But I want to just take you back to 2015 at the Vice-Chancellor's inauguration, where he repositioned the university, and he said, we are not only geographically located in the city, but we are of and for the city. And one of the initiatives he initiated there was an education initiative, which is called the Vice-Chancellor's Education Initiative and Pathways to Education. And it's a multi-stakeholder group. It's led through him, but it's a multi-stakeholder group. A lot of the schools, NPOs, and the university came together. And there's been a turnaround of public education because of that collective effort. And I'll give you some examples, because I think we need to celebrate where some good stuff is happening, and we need to acknowledge that turnarounds can happen when we all come together. So examples of that was 8 years ago, Makanda was considered one of 4 worst performing districts in the country. In 2020, Makanda was the best performing city in the province. The grade 12 pass rate was 12% above the Eastern Cape and 4% above the national average. Another point to make is that we focused on quality passes through these projects as well as overall passes. And to give you an example of that is that in 2017, there were 52 bachelor passes in public education, in 4 of the schools we work in. Last year, there were 167 bachelor passes. And that has resulted in access to roads. Within 2011, only 11 people accessing the university from our no-fee paying schools. And last year, 120. So we are beginning to see some really, really nice shifts in education. One of our no-fee paying schools actually got more bachelors and a better pass rate than one of our Model C schools last year. So there is some amazing work being done, and I think as a result of that collective approach that we're speaking about today, and coming together with shared goals as opposed to beavering in your corners. But the university is open to partnerships, because it's only through community university partnerships that we're going to be able to make the meaningful contribution through the academic project that we can. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dai. So I know there's a hand in the webinar. I just want to do a quick sort of summation of some of the key points. I don't want us to lose the discussion focus. But starting with Ubao Timikos, he was talking about, look, these identified challenges that have been pulled from the report are very much broader challenges and situated in the national and provincial context, and aren't just individual to our context. And they can be responded to in spaces such as LED targets and institutional documentations. But what becomes quite important is curating and creating these spaces And I like the word he used, not to discuss them, but to address the challenges. What forums are going to be open, and using commonalities around that, in particular targeting entrepreneurial support, which I think in the context of Makanda is quite important. I believe that last year's, and May, I'm looking at you so that I don't misquote things, last year's institutional development plan flagged that the unemployment rate in Makanda as a whole was 45.6%, which is a bit higher than the provincial average. So there's already a dual benefit you get from those sort of dynamics. You had Usipo from the MCC talking about some of the suggestions flagged or projects at play, and reiterating at the core that this principle that Mam Dai spoke about at the end is coming together and collaborating around these strategies. And I think it ties very much to what the CEO was talking about when he did his address. Monica made a very specific recommendation around reframing that fourth one of adaptability to the conditions of the pandemic to being a comment and thinking about it as being resilience to the conditions of the pandemic, because that's more in theme and in tune with what we're discussing today, but also is something that carries us through as we start to map out the next few years. I don't want to say post-COVID, but in a world where COVID isn't so dominant, but we live around it more directly. Mam Pam flagged the need for more educational support and asking for education institutions, naming roles, but I think institutions as a whole, to do more direct youth-based and youth-targeted activities to give capacity development, which Mam Dai then spoke about as being, this is part and parcel of what Rhodes has been doing through a variety of initiatives. I know that there's the Rhodes University Community Engagement Office, there's the Vice Chancellor's Education Initiative. These are all institutes that are doing community-based work, but there's always capacity and space to do more. And I think what I'm pulling from there is that part of it is this challenge of trying to fully reach the various corners of our region with the work that's happening. It's a point that was touched on a bit by what was said in earlier comments, but it becomes a very crucial point when you think about how access isn't just access to opportunities, it's access to information about opportunities that are available. And the two gentlemen that side spoke in different ways about access to space and plots to build. The gentleman spoke there about also thinking about how the state could build bigger plots in the east, and then about Chetel, you spoke about spatial development more broadly as being a more targeted approach to trying to respond to some of these challenges. And all of these are noted and documented because I think in reflecting on this roundtable, it reshapes what the outcomes and priorities look like, particularly for Csos Trust working in this project. There's a hand in the chat, if I'm correct. It is Mary Jean Thomas John. If we could give Mary Jean the chance to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What I wanted to say to you is that I am from Cape Town, and I'm not wanting to be prescriptive, but I do know that there's a project in Cohesion and East London called Izenzo, meaning acts, and it comes from a Christian-based organization. But what they are doing is they are getting together high school leavers and putting them into job clubs together and going through the process of how you get a job, how you prepare yourself for a job, including CVs, but also looking at what you want to do. But these job clubs are so united because they meet on a regular basis and they have a responsibility and accountability, so that those who attend will say, okay, today or before we meet next time, I'm going to do A, B, and D. And then the next time they follow up and said, and what happened to A, B, and D? So they become very united. And so then in just outside Cohesion, in one of the smaller areas, people, the kids have got together. So if somebody gets a job interview, the others around them will gather together and pay for their transport and assist them to the job interview or the printing of the paper or whatever. And so those job clubs, some people from there actually develop their own businesses, because that's also part of the program. And that might be a model that could be used, because in a group, it's not just the drain on one-on-one, but it's people encouraging one another. And here in Cape Town, two people started computer businesses, somebody started teaching online, somebody else started doing a garden project, but people had different projects that they were involved in, and it's that peer group, I think, is very useful. And I also found, because I was part of it, if you've got to appear every day for 2 weeks to get some job skills, and then you've got to appear once a week, and you've got to say, what did you do, with that kind of accountability, it changes the whole dynamic from being useless to being encouraging of one another. And I'm really happy to take this offline, because I work in Job Creation Network in Cape Town, and I am very heartened by all the efforts that I have heard that you folk are doing, and thrilled to be on the call. Thank you.
For your inputs there, Mary Jane. I think they're very relevant, and also giving us a reference of I want to call it an organization in Quebec called Izenzo that's doing some work that might be of relevance, and I'm sure someone will take you up on that offer. I know we might definitely just reach out to you for some further conversation and insight into that work. We've got 2 more questions. I know we've got some comments in the chat I'd like to come back to that are quite important, but just for time, I'll move on to the next 2 questions so we can round up this section, so we don't also keep people past the time we had wanted to. And this is the third one, and it's really around when we talk about collaborative efforts and this idea that we must have a multi-sectoral approach to trying to respond to the challenges of our context and more broadly across the province and the country. There's often times when businesses in the private sectors look towards in order to provide support for community responses and for community projects to try and help things. This could be financial or otherwise. But as we all know, in the past 2 years in particular, the impact of the pandemic has really had an impact on how businesses have been functioning, and they've had to tighten up and focus more individually on themselves. And there are these conversations and concerns that the private sector is not being fully and effectively involved in the work that is being done to try and help build communities. So the broad questions being asked here is, in what ways can the private sector support development projects in our city and other contexts outside of looking at just being a financial support aspect? In what ways can they bring forward in-kind support? And building on that, what kind of creative in-kind support strategies can be explored as a way of meaningfully involving the private sector in the development of our spaces? And for me, this ties to something Utembi Nkosi and Monica were talking about taking time out of busy schedules to be here. How do we create space for inclusive participation from such a critical sector in our development and in our context and communities? Are there any insights or questions or thoughts to share at this point? Opening it up to the floor. There's one from the gentleman there. I don't know if there are any other thoughts. Second one there, and it would be great to have one more. We'll take those 2 for now. Sir? No, there's a mic, please.
Thank you, sir. I think training is the way to go. Some people are getting involved in these projects without at least the specific training. I would cite an example about at least people that are collecting at least bottle, the recycling at least of glasses and stuff like that. The turnaround time for collecting such recycled bottles and so on, at times it takes about 10 months up to a year, even more than a year. But at least these communities, they do want to get involved in these projects, but the unfortunate part of it, sufficient training has not been imparted, to those people. I think I would actually narrow it, as that, that the training is essential. Private sector must actually open up ways and means of going at least to these people and go and train these people with this type of skills that they are needed, in township. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Second hand in the middle there.
we just had a discussion around this yesterday. How private sector can support, especially people in civil society. And one of the big issues is that we need professional people to start becoming members of boards of especially your NPOs, because they don't have the capacity or the technical knowledge to take a struggling NPO forward, especially people like in your financial sections, your bookkeepers and your auditors, your legal people. They can provide so much support to a board to get their management in place, especially now that NPOs are also required to start complying with the King codes. And that is something that's very foreign to an NPO, but a business person understands those issues and are able to explain them in simple ways for people to adhere to. And if you have a compliant and an effective organization, other funders will be more interested to partner with you, to work with you, and that will contribute to sustainability. The other issue is that we are, especially from social development side, which we are promoting, is for NPOs, especially those working more in your welfare-ish charitable aid side, to register as public benefit organizations with SARS. On the one hand, they don't pay certain taxes, like the old Section 18A status under the Fundraising Act. And also when an individual or a business donate to that NPO, they can deduct it from their tax. So it is then helping the business also to pay less tax by helping their community, and that is the one aim. And I know there are organizations like Child Welfare that's going out there to promote or advertise that they have that. But I think also when you are a business, every few years you get rid of equipment or furniture because you get the latest, the newest, and your auditor is advising you to do that. We are also trying it within government now to say, every year, the so-called obsolete equipment and furniture, not just to sell it off, but rather to give it to organizations who are in need of it, who can use it. Because if you have nothing, that table that's not as glittery anymore can be of use in the organization where you go, computers, etc. And I think the other issue is space. People need space for them to operate, and especially newly established businesses. For example, we're sitting with a small manufacturing cooperative from youth, unemployed youth that came together. They identified the gap to manufacture detergents here in Makanda that will. They have assessed the market for it. We've got Roach University on business school and pharmacy department to assist with the technical issues. We got the municipality, CIRA, everything. But the thing that prevents them, for example, to access money from us is that they are operating from a room in the backyard of a house, which is not compliant with the health and safety standards, which is not compliant with the fire department's requirement of keeping chemicals, and all of that. And they need space in a light industrial area where they can, under safe circumstances, produce it. But they need it like urgently so that they can access the money from 1st of April. And that is quite the issue, because people are prepared to say, yes, I've got space, but you must pay 9,000 Rand a month for it, which nobody can afford. So I think we need to look at that. And I think this is one of the issues that we are bringing into the Makanda East Precinct planning process, that there needs to be a light industrial manufacturing hub where people like that can be assisted to establish small little manufacturing businesses, because that's a problem in South Africa. We all started retail, but we don't want to establish manufacturing, and that is where we need to promote that. And then the other issue is when our small emerging enterprises, especially our cooperatives, start producing a product, they struggle to access markets. Now the issue, your Pick n Pays, your Spars, your Checkers, they all market e-Woolworths as well. We are buying local. But how to get your door into it to sell your product in Pick n Pay is another story. So somehow I think there need to be a link with the local business to say, how can we assist this new entrepreneur to sell their product locally so that they can generate the income, and I do my corporate social responsibility at the same time to promote it. I think that is a conversation that Cohesion Trust, the municipality, the Makanda Circle Economic Cluster can initiate, because through that we will help a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that input. Chris, I just want to do one more check if there's nothing else in the chat or in the floor. So really much the point of capacity support, skills development, governance support from the private sector and corporate skills, particularly around this issue of compliance, and also developing a conducive and enabling environments to build manufacturing needs through these stakeholder relations and collaborations, I think is quite important to note and flag. Our last set of questions then, I see there are no other questions in the chat, there's just a healthy conversation happening. Our last question is really about trying to look ahead, and this will be the closing part of this plenary discussion. The one report that was produced by these community resilience studies that Cohesion Trust did made some broad recommendations for consideration, both for Makanda, but also for broader civil society as a whole. I'd like to identify some key parts of it. They speak, for example, that drawing on the community resilience survey, Cohesion Trust put forward the following recommendations for consideration. Under political recommendations, they talk about ensure that all plans for reconstruction and recovery of the country and areas are intertwined in the preamble of the Constitution. Recognize the immense positive involvement of social sector organizations in addressing food security issues and boosting community resilience. Greater official acknowledgement and affirmation of the social sector and civil society organizations within that as well. And obviously then creating greater empowerment for the participation and the voice of social sector in forums and engagement spaces where government engages within its social partners. These are points that came up organically in the conversation that took place today. Economically, they talk about how they recommend that alongside stimulating key industrial and service sectors in the formal economy, provision of support for livelihood activities and community-based production, and extensive provision of support, resourcing, and enablement for small producers. So it's really around capacity support and financial support for CSOs, for businesses trying to do this work. And that's a key recommendation that's been reiterated from organic conversation that's been taking place in the day that we've had today. So having reflected on these broad issues, it's quite important now to start shaping priorities for the way moving forward. And a number of different thematic areas and focus areas have emerged. One of the biggest ones, I think it goes to the initial question we asked about bridging the divide, or rather making sense of involving the participation of the East in the projects that we do, is this idea around social cohesion. In fact, one of the comments that was in the chat was from Umam Eleanor Sisulu that speaks about how there must be more work to promote inclusivity. And this point came up in different parts of the conversation, in different tones and framing from different persons here. So it becomes quite clear that there's still a need to put significant focus on this idea of social and social-political, socio-economic cohesion. And Comrade Boitoko then spoke about how it would be ideal to leave with some sort of priority. Is this social cohesion, this collective identity, collective ideology, sufficient as a singular priority? This is not to disregard everything else been spoken about, but as a main priority at this point, bridging this divide between the East and the West and different organizations. Is this sufficient as a singular priority, or must we just work harder and find more creative ways to hold it alongside other key targets and priorities? So we continue doing the work that's being done in civil societies, but we find space to give voice to this social cohesion. Because if we don't, then we find it becomes a repetitive problem that emerges in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time. And linked to that is what sort of targets do we set? There was mention earlier on today about 12 months being set. Are we looking at a 3-year project? We're looking at a 5-year project. Are we looking at the quarterly forums that we mentioned? How do we construct a space to hold this cohesion matter alongside the other priorities? And the second and most important question, I think for me personally, is who should take ownership of addressing these development priorities? Can we've had calls to civil society organizations to be supported by the state and by private sector. Is there anyone else who should form part of this ownership project? Is it a singular person? Is it all of us? And in what formation or capacity? This is basically a summation of the different discussion threads we've had, but I think can form a nice way to reflect on the broad conversations. So I'd like to open it up to see if there are any thoughts at this juncture or inputs to make on this. Is this idea of cohesion as a singular priority enough, or must we still hold it alongside everything else? And if so, how do we hold it alongside the other priorities that we're running? There's one hand at the back, there's another hand there. So we'll start with those two, and there's a third hand there. So we'll start there with Monica.
Thank you very much. I think one of the challenges about a concept like social cohesion is that it's very amorphous, and it speaks to things like Sis Eleanor pointed out, inclusivity, economic justice, and a whole range of things, not just we're the rainbow nation and we all live together in happiness. There's a lot of elements of social cohesion which are really the nuts and bolts of dealing with a very divisive past, but also plotting a course to a shared future. And my concern is if that becomes the central preoccupation, it would need to be unpacked in a great deal more detail so that there is a completely shared understanding and that we are able to check ourselves against our progress in that regard. And yeah, given some of the practical considerations, my suggestion would be is that is added as a priority or is an overarching ideal or aim of what we aim to do, but that it doesn't necessarily subsume anything else. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but I worry that if we move from the practical into the theoretical, we may lose a lot of ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Next hand over there, about Tim goes.
Okay, thanks, Program Direct. I think for me, we all have identified what are our key challenges in Makanda. So I think it's all about now resource mobilization and the optimal use of available resources, because to address these problems, I think we need, I mean, the concept of social cohesion, I'm also not sure what it means, but I think the best thing is how do we coordinate ourselves, bringing together our own different expertise and resources, trust each other, not attack each other, and then work together. If roads has got an input, then they will bring their own input. If municipal has got an input, they bring their own input. Civil society, they bring their own input. There's already, I think it's been mentioned that there are attempts to bridge the divide between Makanda East and Makanda West by that precinct plan, where we're trying to identify land available, make people to have access to land. So I think for me, it's access to resources in a different form, like land, finance, training, whatever you call it. I think it's more about coordinated approach to address our common problems, other than social cohesion, or But we need to work together. We don't need to be enemies. We don't need to bend tires. We don't need to not trust each other. We are all partners in this. I think that's an approach,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And then the last hand from the floor, from Mount.
Just two thoughts from me. The first one is there are amazing pockets of excellence happening all over this city. There are also a lot of wonderful emerging social innovations happening. So could we not establish a repository where people can just pop into that repository, what they're doing, where they're doing, and the scope of their work? And in that way, we'll be able to get better synergies between all of these initiatives across the city. People will be able to find each other and pair up working together on things as opposed to separately. And there'll just generally be a much more coordinated approach. And the second one links to that is, how do, in the media, we're a broken city. That's what people out there understand. So how do we go forward now and reposition ourselves, even in our imperfectness now? But there's a great story to tell, how a city has come together. Donors know that. Donors give us more money now than they did before because of how we, certainly in the education space, how we are working together with shared goals. So how do we reposition ourselves in the public space in order to attract investors, in order to bring more people to our schools, in order to draw the kind of numbers we used to draw to the National Arts Festival, etc., etc. I'm wondering if it hasn't got something to do with that broken window theory, which states that, when you have visible signs of crime and neglect, such as broken windows, it creates an environment that promotes more neglect and crime and disorder. So the converse happens, that once you start fixing the broken windows and people see the city looking neat and clean, it speaks to what is going on behind the scenes. So how do we better communicate what is happening and repositioning our city as we sort of have come together now? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we've got two more, and I'll actually leave that question a bit alive before I summarize. We've got two more questions that are up in the webinar itself, two more hands. I believe the first one is Uboniswa Mzimba. Just say hi when you're able to. There we go.
I hope I'm audible. And the name is Noel Ngesi, and not Boniswa Mzimba. I think with Diane and Nkosi have covered a whole lot of points that I wanted to cover. But overall, also I must include some of her comments. She had magic words there, like an umbrella organization. And there are magic words like coordination, collaboration. And I think we've heard about this MCCC. And what that tries to do as the Makanda Civil Community Coalition is to bring forth that coordination. And I'm hoping that one of these days we'll be able to sit down with the key players that are currently doing great work out there in Makanda, and so that we identify an approach and talk about it, where no one will be left behind. Currently, there's a whole lot of good work that's being done. Great initiatives, like Dai was saying, but we need a repository. And I think the idea that the MCCC is trying to bring forth is an organization of organizations, where all of these ideas and all of this work that's being done will be coordinated under one umbrella, where the participants will collaborate on an ongoing basis, where real cohesion will take place, so that we don't exclude the rest of Makanda. Currently, there are many parts of Makanda that get excluded from all the good things that are happening in Makanda. We cannot remain that way for much longer. We've got to pull our resources together, pull our ideas together, and work under one umbrella. And before I round off, I'd like to say we have identified three legs of what we call the triangulation between the knowledge hub as represented by Rose University and other institutions of learning, and the people, which is the MCCC, the Coalition of People of Makanda, and then government as represented by the municipality. That's triangulation and tripartite is so important, so that all the role players are included. Like my colleague there, Mr. Akom, that presented briefly the structure that we identified, the different civil forums. Civil Forum for Education, Social Development, Health and Welfare, Economic Development, and Community Development. Under those civil forums, for the different civil society sectors, which is where they find expression. So we'll be able to work together and coordinating an approach where an umbrella body has got a finger on the pulse on every sector of the society in Makanda, in the Makanda, and indeed the bigger Makanda. So I'm hoping that one of these days we'll be able to present that approach and that idea, which does not replace any organization, but that enhances their work in a coordinated approach.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. No, I'd like to next time to go to Mam Eleanor Sosulu. Are you still on the call?
Me?
You are audible.
Okay. Without an echo, I hope.
Not at all. Please proceed.
Okay. So I want to say on social cohesion. I think there's an approach which has to inform projects. I'm trying to just change my mic so that I can switch off the speaker so that I don't have an. Sorry about that. Okay, so that we have an approach where, for example, multilingualism. We need to invest in multilingualism to be truly inclusive. So this webinar is in English, and so there is a level of exclusion. And to make this a truly inclusive conversation, one would have to have add to this, replicate this conversation, yes, Xhosa, in different contexts, either as a public meeting in the churches, because again, we bring the faith-based community to be truly inclusive, but also through webinars. And we've had Indigenous language webinars last year as Puku Children's Literature Foundation, and we realized it hadn't been done before. And it was a huge eye-opener in terms of inclusiveness in putting the work into actually making webinars successful in Indigenous languages. So I think that a conversation like this has to be replicated through radio and through public participation in Xhosa, in Fingo, in churches, but also digitally, and being more digitally inclusive, of course. I think the other thing, the point, and so social cohesion isn't just, I think, a distinct area in itself, but something which, and I think Monica touched on that, where everything we do, we must be able to have a kind of checkpoints to see how are we being inclusive. Are we being inclusive in terms of language, resources, sensitivity to people's situations? For example, volunteerism. Sometimes you can assume as a middle-class person, oh, I'll volunteer. But if you relied only on volunteerism, some people would be left out because they don't have data or they don't have transport, the capacity for transport. The other thing I think is very important in terms of inclusion and social cohesion is spatial justice. Someone pointed out the issue of spatial justice. How fair are the decisions that municipality or business community make? Is there ongoing spatial injustice in Makanda, or does everybody have equal opportunity, access to land? And I think that's something which really needs to be addressed. So I think the issue of social cohesion is something which must inform all the different projects and initiatives. I just want to say, on having an umbrella organization, I think it must be constructed very carefully, because umbrella organizations can be stifling. But if attention is paid to inclusion, and then you can have an effective organization. I would also say that we need to pay attention to radio and media and existing initiatives. I think Radio Grainstown is very important, and I was glad to hear from the input at this meeting. It's actually extremely important on this issue of inclusion. And then, of course, the schools, working out with the schools how the best, you have the best performing and the struggling schools, how to work out an inclusive agenda for all the schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Eleanor, for that. And then the last hand we'll take also for time is from the webinar, and that is Sir Rod Abner. Rod, are you still there?
Hi.
Please proceed.
I can't hear my speaker now, and I'm assuming. Sorry, I just wanted to acknowledge Thomas's point in the chat about the fundamental reallocation of resources, redistribution of resources. But at the same time, I think there's some very interesting research globally that talks about what kinds of factors drive community attachment and social cohesion. So they look at basic services and the economy and safety and leadership and all those kinds of things, and resource management. But interestingly, they also included things like aesthetics, social offerings, in other words, opportunities for social interaction and citizen caring, openness and welcomeness, how welcoming the community is to difference, inclusivity, different people, then civic involvement, volunteerism, etc., and social capital, social networks between residents. But I think what was interesting in that respect, global research, was that social offerings, openness, and aesthetics were the factors that actually most related to community attachment and cohesion in the communities that were studied, which is a bit surprising in some ways. And it might be that it was sort of stilted towards, northern research rather than southern research. But I think there's an opportunity there. What strikes me about projects like River Rescue is how they initiate and catalyze cross-class partnerships and involve people from very many different parts of the community in that openness. And there are, in a sense, opportunities for social interaction and citizen caring. They address aesthetics, physical beauty, green spaces, environmental issues, and there is that element of openness as well. And I was wondering, with the big drive by the LRC, with the Ezihagweni Street Committee to clear up 141 dump sites in the city, if there isn't an opportunity there for cross-class, collaborations to occur on a mass scale. The municipality has been given till Friday to clear those sites. It's never going to happen. But if there was a concerted effort by the community to address those things at hyperlocal levels across the city, in the way that River Rescue, in a sense, has attempted to do that, perhaps there is an opportunity there. And also just thinking about our green spaces, you know, the botanical gardens, the opportunities for expansion there, some of the parks in Joza and so on. There are opportunities there for social offerings addressing aesthetics and openness and social interaction and inclusivity. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Rod. I do see your hand, Chair. I'm just very cognizant of time, so I hope you'll allow me to just close up the session so that we don't run too far late. But just to round up, I think the big key point that emerged at this juncture is that singularly you can't focus on social cohesion as a priority, nor can you even focus on it without defining what you mean in the context that you speak of it in. It must be reconstructed and deconstructed into ways that make sense and resonate with the ground and the people that you work with. And I think that's part of what Bautemkosi you were touching on with your input, is that if we don't understand this concept, how can we ever then hope to drive and advance it more forward? And I think Ma'am Eleanor spoke quite lovely about this idea of being inclusive linguistically in our language, and how we curate and run these spaces, and how we have conversations about these key thematic areas in ways where we're also cognizant of who's able to be here and talk at the space, because that's really some of the difficult work that comes around inclusivity. And these are principles that have to underpin and underscore our work. There's no singular 4-step program to being more inclusive. It's an active principle in how you conduce and run your work and organize, particularly within civil society. And I think it's really about thinking and holding on to those principles as best as possible, just to try and summarize there. And then this reiterated point about a coordinated step towards building broader communities, building broader activities and work towards all organizations working together on a particular project is quite important. But at its core, without reiterating too many points, I think the core element is that if we talk about cohesion, we talk about it as being the flavor of what drives our work in many different facets. We talk about it as being the theme song really that plays as we try and build our projects and programs. And I think as a way of wrapping up, thinking about how we've reflected on the key outcomes, the key issues identified, built on it, identified some particular talking points for the municipality. I think there's been enough here to inform a healthy reflection from Csos Trust, who are particularly looking for some talking points to guide as they move forward the rest of the year. So I'm sure you're quite tired of hearing my voice, so I'm going to hand over to Comrade Boykoko just to do the broad conclusion and next steps. But from my side, thank you to everyone just for participating so actively. I know there'll be a broader communication from KT quite soon about this discussion, and obviously we look forward to further spaces of this nature. Comrade Boykoko, please come through.
Thank you very much, Sake. And I think it has been a very half day, at the same time a very, very long day. Sometimes the intensity of the discussions also exhausts us. What is important, that there are two things that we must separate as we come to the conclusion. In the first instance, Cohesion Trust was sharing the information from the research, from the study that we generated ourselves here and nationally. I think that was the first component that from Cohesion Trust perspective, that was done very well, but also as a basis of a number of things that needs to be considered going forward. In that first instance, I think, as we promised when we were undertaking the study in the middle of the COVID, and as we all remember that we tried to do it, the feedback to the community of Makanda last year, and it was disrupted at the end of almost when it was supposed to happen by the local government elections. I think we have fulfilled that objective and the collective agreement we had. The second component is what we want to do going forward. Because part of it is that as we have heard the rest of the discussions, we need to open up dialogue, communication and discussion, not only to appreciate the kind of the challenges that we are confronted with and the necessary solutions as we need to do to respond to these challenges. But it also helps to understand and appreciate each other in order for us to be able to collectively agree on a way forward. Now I want to conclude in the following way. You will recall that about 3 weeks ago, Csos Trust issued a call to action, a statement to civil society to say we can no longer afford to sit back and watch our country suffering. And the statement was saying, let us begin a journey, collectively, nationally, and create a movement among ourselves to claim back our country, but also to take responsibility for our future. That was the essence of the call to action. And in that vein, that call to action is formed and informed by the kind of the key issues that are emerging here. Perhaps the relationship will be how do we move these things forward, but also beginning to connecting what we learn and experience here to other colleagues across the country, so that we begin to coordinate and work together and respond to the challenges that we are facing. For example, the food security is not just a Makanda issue. The unemployment of the youth is a national crisis. Corruption, it is a national crisis. And the many other ills that our society is confronted with. The key question is, where are we and what are our responsibilities as civil society, and what is our contribution as the citizens of Makanda in building a national movement that will enable us to bestow the future possible for our children born and yet to be born. That was the essence. The rest we leave to the Makanda, but I want to elevate some of the key issues that we need to build on moving forward even from Makanda, because we all have the responsibility to make Makanda work, but we equally have the responsibility to have the local government work for the citizens at the local level. The challenges facing the local government is not just in Makanda, it's a national challenge. We need to identify what are the sources of this challenge and how we play our part, because we are not going to solve it if we keep on complaining from the distance. The time is now for us to take that responsibility. With respect to Makanda, I have heard and listened to the following issues. We said when we came here, we opened this morning, that we have gathered here, all of us, to come and listen and share ideas with ourselves collectively in order to move forward. We have said the research was completed, we are going to share it, but we begin to identify what needs to be done going forward. We were doing that in the spirit that we are indeed the people, that we are the people we have been waiting for. We are the people that we have been waiting for. We are the change makers that we are looking for. In other words, the issues and the challenges that we have raised, we are the ones, we are ourselves to change them. And that collectively we are the leaders that we want to see. In other words, nobody outside ourselves will be able to help us to address these issues. That the stories of resilience that we have shared since this morning are the stories of the realities and the truth that we have experienced and we have lived through, and that those become a repository of informing the kind of plans and strategies and enhancing what we have been doing all along, perhaps in a different way. And that we have listened and raised the issues that, one, there is an issue to connect and strengthen a social cohesion between Makanda East and Makanda West. But social cohesion must be embedded in what we do. It is not just an idea, and we are not going to address it by just thinking about it. Firstly, we acknowledge that there is a need of the social cohesion as we have done, but moving forward, there are certain principles that we need to undertake beyond the unpacking for shared understanding of what social cohesion means. We know that within it there are issues of inclusivity and ensuring of the social justice, that whatever we do and how we do it, we must bear in mind that the end results must lead to all of us participating, taking responsibility and ownership of what we are doing. We may have different resources and capacities. Our responsibilities is to ensure that we help each other to have requisite resources and capacities to be active and equal participants and owners of what we do to take Makanda forward. One of those things that we will have to bear in mind is the access to resources, helping each other for resource mobilization, and the reallocation of the resources that we have in the manner that it ensures that we achieve what we have set ourselves to do. Most significantly, how do we share information? How do we ensure that we have access to information collectively so that we are not misinformed and we are not being led by misperceptions and gossips, but we share information as a form of transparency for our work and working together. And most importantly, we need to communicate, we need to dialogue, and we need to create spaces for us to be able to share our own internal feelings, our desires, our needs, and how best can we collectively address those things. And finally, that will ensure that nobody is left behind. And I think collectively we seem to be saying, more often is what we do, how we do it, that perhaps leads to certain misunderstanding, that we need to interrogate the manner in which we do things and how we do things. It is agreed, as I heard from colleagues, that one of the key questions of information sharing and access to resources and ensuring that nobody is left behind is an issue of the language, so that we collectively have the capacity and the means to participate in the best languages and communication mediums as possible to enable us to feel freer. I want to believe that we are saying the platforms that we have established in Makanda are necessary and appropriate. Our responsibility is to ensure that they are all inclusive, participatory, and accommodative. And perhaps that's where we need to go. In terms of the specific issues which we didn't, besides food security and so on that we discussed earlier, it would appear that appropriate programs are already on the table. How do we ensure that they are responsive and owned by all of us? Perhaps that's what over the next few weeks we should be engaging each other. We should be ensuring that the Makanda East is more effective and participatory within the processes that they are underway, and that becomes part of our collective responsibilities. I mean, I had a quick chat, for example, with Sake and some colleagues, often in the Makanda East, to say we need to go back and all of us reevaluate so that we are able to take responsibility to make all our initiatives possible. But I think let us slowly take a reflection beyond this meeting, and perhaps over the next 3 weeks, we should be able to put something on the table to say, this is how we all see it happening, for all of us to take ownership of the future of Makanda. I thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We won't belabor the point. Thank you again to everyone for forming part of today. There will be a report that's produced and I'm sure will be distributed by Csos Trust. For those of you that are in the room, there will be refreshments served downstairs on the first floor, and we'd also like to extend an invitation for you to join the memorial service that's taking place this afternoon of the recently deceased former Director of Local Economic Development in Makanda Municipality, Rihanna Mayring. But once more, thank you for your very, very engaged participation. It is always valuable, and I'm very certain that when these reports are distributed, they'll inform further conversations. Thank you again. Anyone else in the room who would like to speak a bit more? To Jerry, who spoke about the MCCC, he's over there in the corner and has invited people to speak to him about the concept. All right, thank you very much. Have a lovely day. Oh, it's downstairs, first floor by the canteen.